When I saw this woman pleading, "Can I carry bricks in exchange for food?" I had no idea I was documenting the return of the engineer who had designed half of the city's skyscrapers, and who in just a few hours would save hundreds of lives from a horrible death. The construction site of the Twin Towers residential complex was in absolute chaos that September morning. Engineer Carlos Mendoza ran between the concrete structures with his helmet crooked and architectural plans trembling in his sweaty hands, shouting orders that no one could execute because the problem was impossible to solve. "Stop everything," he yelled at the 50 workers frantically laboring on the foundation of Building B. "We can't continue pouring concrete until we figure out what's wrong." But Carlos knew that stopping meant falling further behind on a schedule already 3 weeks late. And losing more time meant millions in penalties, contract cancellations, and possibly the bankruptcy of the construction company that employed 200 families. Because something was terribly wrong with Building B's foundation. Cracks were appearing where there shouldn't be cracks. The concrete was settling unevenly. And the structural calculations, verified 3 times by different engineers, made no sense when confronted with the physical reality of the construction. "Carlos," shouted Marcos Silva, a foreman with 20 years of experience, approaching with a look of total panic. "The cracks in the base are growing. In 2 hours, they've doubled in size." Carlos felt his stomach churn. Growing cracks meant something was fundamentally wrong with the entire structure. And if the foundation failed with workers inside, "Evacuate Building B," he ordered. "Now! Everyone out!" "Carlos," Marcos grabbed his arm, "if we evacuate, we'll have to explain why to the investors. And if we can't fix this today, if we don't fix it, 50 men could be crushed by tons of concrete." The workers began hurriedly exiting the building, but Carlos knew evacuation was only a temporary measure. Somewhere in the structural calculations was an error that 3 engineers had failed to identify. An error that could kill people if not corrected. "Engineer Carlos," shouted Amanda Santos, the site manager, running toward him with her phone in hand and a look of sheer terror. "The Japanese investor is here for inspection. He's coming here in 20 minutes. Carlos felt his legs go weak. Hiroshi Tanaka, the Japanese magnate who had invested $40 million in the project, was coming to personally check the progress of the construction that should have been nearly complete. "Amanda, what do I tell him?" "That we evacuated the building because we can't figure out why the structure is cracking?" "And it gets worse," Amanda continued. "If he cancels the investment today, we have to return the $40 million within 30 days. The company goes bankrupt and 200 families lose their jobs." It was in this moment of absolute despair that they heard a hesitant female voice from the site gate. "Excuse me, may I speak to the person in charge?" Carlos turned and saw a woman of about 40 at the entrance to the site. Dark hair tied in a simple ponytail, clothes obviously worn for several days, worn-out sneakers, and an old backpack. But it was her eyes that caught attention, blue and intelligent, as if they saw things others couldn't perceive. "Ma'am, this is a dangerous construction site," Marcos said automatically. "Restricted area for visitors." "I understand," she replied, her voice carrying an unidentifiable accent. "But I heard you talking about structural problems. I can help." Carlos almost laughed at the absurd situation. Amid the crisis they faced, now a random woman was offering technical help. "Ma'am, we appreciate the concern, but we're dealing with complex structural engineering. Our experts." "Your experts haven't identified the problem in 3 weeks," she gently interrupted. "And from what I observed from outside, you don't have much time before the structure actually collapses." Marcos looked at her in disbelief. "You understand construction?" "I understand a bit." "A bit," Carlos repeated. "Ma'am, this is a 40-story building with Japanese structural technology. It's not a house renovation." The woman looked at Building B, her eyes scanning the structure with a precision that made Carlos slightly uncomfortable. Twin towers with shared foundation, steel bracing system, post-tension slabs with cables, she said calmly. The problem isn't in the part you can see. Carlos and Marcos exchanged shocked looks. Those weren't terms an ordinary person would know. How do you know these technical terms? Carlos asked. Because, she hesitated, as if deciding how much to reveal. I've worked on similar projects. Where? Various places. Carlos was about to dismiss her when his phone rang. It was the guard at the main gate. Engineer Carlos, the Japanese investor, just arrived. He's coming up to the site. Carlos felt pure panic. Hiroshi Tanaka was arriving to find an evacuated site, cracking structure, and a team with no solutions. Ma'am, he turned to the woman, desperate, do you really think you can help? She looked directly into his eyes, and for a moment, Carlos saw something that made him stop breathing. It wasn't just confidence, it was absolute knowledge, as if she could see through the entire structure and identify exactly where the problem was. I can identify the error in the calculations in 15 minutes, she said simply. But I'll need access to the original structural designs. In exchange for what? Carlos asked, still not believing what he was considering. The woman looked at the workers still carrying aluminum lunchboxes. It was lunchtime, interrupted by the evacuation. In exchange for a plate of food. Anything. I haven't eaten in 2 days. The simplicity of the request hit Carlos like a punch to the stomach. This woman was offering to solve a $40 million problem in exchange for a worker's lunch. Anna, Marcos yelled to one of the female workers, bring your lunchbox here. Ana Pereira, a welder with 15 years of experience, approached confused. Foreman Marcos, what happened? The lady is going to borrow your lunch for our technical consultant. The mysterious woman accepted the lunchbox with a gratitude that made Anna emotional. Thank you so much. It's been a while since I've seen home-cooked food. Ma'am, Carlos said urgently, 15 minutes to identify the problem? 10 minutes to identify, 5 to explain the solution. At that moment, a black limousine parked at the main gate. Hiroshi Tanaka had arrived. My God, Carlos exclaimed. He's early. The woman looked at the Japanese businessman getting out of the car accompanied by 3 assistants and 2 translators. Engineer Carlos, she said calmly, show me the designs. Now. Carlos led her quickly to the container serving as an office, where structural plans covered a large table. The woman leaned over the drawings, and immediately her eyes began moving with impossible speed, as if reading code only she understood. Here, she said after just 3 minutes, pointing to a specific section of the project. The error is here. What? The support beams for the basement were calculated considering the individual weight of each tower. But you didn't compensate for the load transfer between the twin foundations. Carlos looked where she pointed, his face gradually paling. When one tower sways in the wind, it transfers additional weight to the other through the shared foundation. But the second tower wasn't designed to support double the weight. My God, Marcos whispered. That means, the woman completed gravely, if you continue construction without reinforcing the foundations, one of the towers will collapse. Not today, not tomorrow, but when you reach the 30th floor and there's strong enough wind. Carlos felt as if he'd been electrocuted. How many people would be in the building when that happened? Considering it's a residential complex? Approximately 1,500 people. The silence in the container was deafening. And you know how to fix this? Carlos asked, his voice a whisper. I do. But it will require structural reinforcement costing about $8 million and delaying construction by 6 months. Marcos stepped closer. How can you know such specific numbers? The woman hesitated, looking out the window where Hiroshi Tanaka was approaching the container with his entourage. Because it's not the first time I've seen this kind of error. And because she took a deep breath, because I've calculated similar corrections before. Where? On projects I'd prefer not to mention. Carlos was about to insist when Hiroshi Tanaka knocked on the container door. Engineer Mendoza, may we talk? Carlos looked at the mysterious woman, then at Marcos, then at the plans revealing an error that could cause the greatest structural tragedy in the city's history. Ma'am, he whispered urgently, what's your name? Marina, she replied softly. Marina, I need you here during this meeting. I need you to explain everything to the investor. I can't. Please, Carlos begged. 1,500 lives depend on us convincing this man that you're right. Marina looked at Hiroshi Tanaka through the window, and Carlos saw something like fear cross her eyes. All right, she said finally. But after this, I disappear. And you pretend you never saw me. Hiroshi Tanaka was exactly the kind of man Carlos feared facing in a crisis. Tall, impeccably dressed, eyes that analyzed everything with the mathematical precision of someone who had built an empire based on never accepting failures or excuses. Engineer Mendoza, Hiroshi greeted in near-perfect Portuguese. I've come to personally check the progress of the Twin Towers. I hope for good news. Carlos looked at Marina, who had retreated to the corner of the container as if wanting to become invisible, then at the plans revealing the potentially fatal error. Mr. Tanaka, we have important developments to discuss. What kind of developments? Carlos took a deep breath, knowing the next words would determine the fate of 200 families. We've discovered a structural problem that needs to be corrected before we continue construction. Hiroshi frowned. What kind of problem? An error in the load distribution calculations between the twin foundations. An error, Hiroshi repeated, his voice carrying a dangerous chill. Engineer Mendoza, 3 different engineers reviewed these plans. How can there be an error? Marina stepped forward from the corner where she was hiding. Because all 3 engineers calculated each tower individually, but didn't consider the dynamic interaction between them. Hiroshi turned to her, noticing her for the first time. And you are? Marina. Structural consultant. Consultant? Hiroshi studied her appearance with obvious disdain. From which company? Marina hesitated. I work independently. Independently, Hiroshi repeated with sarcasm. And how much experience do you have with structures of this complexity? Enough to know that if you continue building without corrections, one of the towers will collapse when it reaches critical height. Critical height? Marina approached the plans, pointing to specific calculations. 30th floor. When the total weight of the structure reaches the point where the shared foundation can no longer properly distribute loads. Hiroshi looked at the numbers Marina indicated. Even though he wasn't an engineer, he understood enough mathematics to perceive something was wrong. How many people would be at risk, he asked. 1,500 residents, plus visitors and complex staff. Carlos saw Hiroshi pale slightly. And you know how to fix this alleged problem? I do. But it will cost approximately $8 million and delay completion by 6 months. $8 million? Hiroshi repeated. For a problem that 3 certified engineers didn't identify, but an independent consultant discovered in 15 minutes? Marina looked at him calmly. Mr. Tanaka, I can give you a demonstration that proves I'm right. What kind of demonstration? Let me calculate exactly when and how the structure will fail if you continue construction without corrections. If my calculations are wrong, you ignore me and proceed with the original project. Hiroshi considered the proposal. And if they're right? If they're right, you avoid a tragedy that would destroy not only this project, but the reputation of everyone involved. Carlos intervened. Mr. Tanaka, we don't have much to lose. If she's wrong, we continue as planned. If she's right, we save 1,500 lives, Hiroshi completed. Marina was already moving toward the office computer. I need 30 minutes to redo all the structural calculations. 30 minutes to calculate what took 6 months to design, Marcos asked incredulously. 30 minutes to find a specific error when you know exactly what to look for. Hiroshi checked his expensive watch. You have 30 minutes. But Marina, if this is a waste of time, it won't be. Marina sat in front of the computer and began typing with a speed that hypnotized everyone present. Numbers appeared and disappeared on the screen, complex calculations being processed faster than any software could manage. How is she doing that? Marcos whispered to Carlos. I don't know, but look at the speed of those calculations. Marina worked in total silence, her hands moving across the keyboard like a pianist performing a symphony. After 20 minutes, she leaned back from the screen. Done. Already, Hiroshi approached. Mr. Tanaka, based on current calculations, Tower B will experience critical structural failure on the 31st floor, approximately 18 months after completion. How can you be so specific? Marina turned the screen so everyone could see. Complex graphs showed weight distribution, stress points, and failure projections with aerospace engineering precision. The failure will occur during winds of approximately 80 kilometers per hour, a common speed during winter storms. The natural oscillation of Tower A will transfer additional load to Tower B's foundation, which will fail because it was designed for individual weight. Hiroshi studied the graphs, his expression gradually changing from skepticism to alarm. And the correction? Reinforcement of foundations with additional steel beams, load redistribution through a modified bracing system, and installation of seismic dampers between the towers. Cost? $8.2 million. Additional timeline, 6.5 months. Hiroshi remained silent for several minutes, processing the implications. Marina, he said finally, are these calculations correct? Completely. How can I be sure? Marina saved the files and stood up. Because if they were wrong, I wouldn't risk my reputation presenting them to one of the world's most influential investors. Your reputation? Hiroshi repeated. Marina, who are you really? Marina looked out the container window, seeing workers eating in the shade, unaware their lives had just been saved. I'm someone who has seen what happens when structural errors aren't corrected in time. What do you mean? Marina turned to face him directly. I mean, I've witnessed a building collapse due to calculation negligence. And I swear I'll never allow that to happen again. Hiroshi studied Marina's face with growing intensity, recognizing something in her eyes he couldn't define, deep knowledge mixed with ancient pain. Marina, you said you've witnessed a building collapse. Where was that? Marina closed her eyes for a moment, as if gathering courage to revisit a painful memory. Mexico City. 2017 earthquake. A 20-story residential building that should have withstood the tremor perfectly. Carlos felt a chill run down his spine. And it didn't withstand? It didn't withstand because the structural calculations had exactly the same error you have here. Foundations improperly sized for lateral load transfer. How many people? 342 deaths, Marina said, her voice carrying the weight of someone who never forgot that number. Including 78 children. The silence in the container was absolute. My God, Marcos whispered. And you were there? I was there because I was responsible for the structural calculations. The confession fell like a bomb in the room. Hiroshi approached slowly. You were responsible for the error that killed 300 people? No, Marina said firmly. I discovered the error 2 months before the earthquake and tried to correct it. but the investors refused to pay for the correction. And you allowed them to continue? I reported it publicly. They sued me for breach of confidentiality, destroyed me professionally, spread that I was an incompetent engineer creating unnecessary panic. Carlos looked at Marina with new understanding. And when the building collapsed exactly as I predicted, they blamed me. Said my original calculations were wrong, that I was responsible for the deaths. But you tried to prevent it. I tried. But it didn't matter. The media, the victims' families, the government, they all needed a scapegoat. And I was easier to blame than powerful businessmen. Hiroshi absorbed each word with a somber expression. What happened after? I lost my engineering license. Lost my home, my family, my identity. I spent the last 7 years wandering between cities, doing temporary work, carrying guilt for deaths I tried to prevent. Marina pointed to the plans on the table. That's why I recognized this error immediately. Because it's the same error that kills people when engineers choose profit over safety. And you're certain about our structure? I'm absolutely certain. And Mr. Tanaka, if you ignore this correction, 342 deaths will seem like a small number compared to what will happen here. Hiroshi walked to the window, observing the two towers rising majestically against the sky. Symbols of progress and success that could become monuments to tragedy. Marina, if I approve this correction, I need to know I can trust your calculations. You can. How can I be sure? Marina approached him. Because this time, I won't allow them to silence me. This time, I'll fight until the last beam is reinforced, until the last weld is verified, until this structure is absolutely safe. And if the other investors question the additional cost, then you tell them how many lives 8 million can save. Hiroshi looked at Marina, a woman who had lost everything for trying to do the right thing, who was now risking rejection again to prevent another tragedy. Marina, I need to call the investor board. Can you stay here while I explain the situation? I can. And will you explain personally to them why this correction is necessary? Marina hesitated. Mr. Tanaka, if I speak to other investors, they might investigate my past and discover you're an engineer who has already saved lives before. Discover I'm an engineer who was blamed for a tragedy I tried to prevent. Hiroshi studied her face for a long moment. Marina, which would you prefer, to be remembered as a woman who carried bricks for food, or as an engineer who prevented 1,500 people from dying? Marina looked at Carlos and Marcos, who watched her with growing respect, then at the plans showing the potentially fatal problem. I prefer to be remembered as someone who didn't allow history to repeat itself. Then help me convince very rich, very stubborn people that 8 million is a cheap price to save lives. Marina nodded. When will they arrive? In 1 hour. Perfect. That gives me time to prepare a presentation that will make them understand this isn't about money, it's about not having blood on their hands. Carlos watched this interaction with growing fascination. In 2 hours, Marina had gone from a woman asking for manual labor in exchange for food to a structural consultant commanding $1 million meeting. Marina, he said, who are you really? Marina turned to him, and for the first time, Carlos saw a glimpse of the renowned engineer she had been before everything collapsed. Carlos, in 1 hour you'll find out. And I hope when you do, you'll still trust me. The meeting that happened 1 hour later was the most tense in the construction company's history. In the makeshift conference room in the main container, 7 millionaire investors crowded around the table where Marina had spread plans, calculations, and projections that looked like military secret codes. Gentlemen, Hiroshi began, this is Marina. She identified a critical problem in our structure. The investors looked at Marina with expressions ranging from curiosity to poorly disguised disdain. A woman in simple clothes explaining engineering to men who own construction companies wasn't exactly what they expected. Critical problem? Asked Robert Chen, a real estate magnate from San Francisco. Hiroshi, our engineers assured us there are no issues. There are, Marina said simply, pointing to a specific section of the plans. And if not corrected, one of the towers will collapse. The silence in the room was disturbing. Collapse, repeated Alessandro Rossi, an Italian builder responsible for skyscrapers in Rome. Ma'am, that's a very serious accusation. It's a prediction based on precise mathematical calculation, Marina corrected, turning on the laptop. I can show you exactly when and how it will happen. For 30 minutes, Marina presented an analysis that left 7 millionaires completely silent. Stress graphs, wind simulations, failure projections, all presented with precision rivaling NASA presentations. Damn, Robert Chen murmured when she finished. These calculations are impressive. They're accurate, Marina corrected. And they're terrifying. Alessandro leaned forward. Marina, where did you learn structural engineering at this level? Marina hesitated, looking at Hiroshi, who nodded encouragingly. National University of Mexico. Masters at MIT. PhD in seismic structures from University of Tokyo. The investors exchanged looks of growing surprise. MIT, Robert repeated. And Tokyo? And I worked 10 years designing earthquake-resistant structures for governments and multinational companies. Which companies? Alessandro pressed. Marina took a deep breath. Chen Industries, Rossi Construction, Tanaka Global Engineering. The room fell into absolute silence as the investors recognized the names of their own companies. Wait, Robert Chen stood up slowly. Marina Valdez? Marina nodded, finally revealing her full identity. My God, Alessandro whispered. Marina Valdez. You designed half our skyscrapers in Rome. And our seismic buildings in Tokyo, Hiroshi added, his voice carrying growing shock. Robert Chen was looking at Marina as if seeing a ghost. Marina, you disappeared 7 years ago. After the Mexico City incident. After you destroyed me for trying to do the right thing, Marina corrected, her voice gaining strength. After you preferred to blame me rather than admit you rejected corrections that could have saved lives. Marina, Alessandro began. No, she interrupted. You want to know who I am? I'm the engineer who spent 7 years carrying bricks, sweeping streets, doing any manual labor I could find, because you made sure I'd never work as an engineer again. But the calculations you presented today are correct. As they were correct 7 years ago in Mexico City. As they will be correct 7 years from now if you make the same mistake again. Hiroshi stood up. Marina, if we approve the corrections, if we invest the additional 8 million, would you accept personally supervising the modifications? Marina looked at each face in the room, men who had participated in her professional destruction, who now needed her expertise to prevent tragedy. I accept. But with conditions. Which? First, total control over structural aspects. No modifications to reinforcements without my approval. Accepted. Second, when this project is safely completed, you will publicly clarify what really happened in Mexico City. The investors exchanged uncomfortable looks. Marina, Robert said carefully, that could open legal questions. Legal questions are preferable to living knowing 300 people died because you prioritized profit over lives. Alessandro nodded slowly. I accept your conditions. So do I, Hiroshi confirmed. One by one, all investors agreed. Marina looked at Carlos and Marcos, who had witnessed the entire revelation with expressions of growing admiration. Carlos, Marcos, do you still want me to carry bricks? Carlos smiled. "Marina, we want you to run this entire construction site. And we want to learn everything you can teach us," Marcos added. Marina picked up the empty lunchbox Anna had lent her and held it for a moment. "You know what? I'll also accept this condition, that Anna, the welder who lent me her lunch, be promoted to structural welding supervisor." "Why, Hiroshi asked. "Because people who share food with strangers understand the value of human life. And projects that save lives need to be supervised by people who truly care." 2 months after the meeting that changed everything, Marina stood atop Tower A, now reinforced with steel beams shining like a metallic backbone, supervising the installation of the seismic dampers she had designed. "Engineer Marina," shouted Ana Pereira, now welding supervisor, climbing the emergency ladder with a golden helmet identifying her new position. The 20th floor welds had been approved. Strength tested at 150% above required. Marina smiled, watching Anna command a team of 15 welders with an authority that had blossomed in just 8 weeks. "Anna, how does it feel leading a technical team?" "Like waking from a bad dream," Anna replied, her eyes shining. 30 years welding under others' orders, and now I discover I can lead." Marina had insisted that field workers be promoted to supervisory positions when they demonstrated competence. In 2 months, 7 workers had become section supervisors, 3 had been promoted to specialized technicians, and Anna had proven a natural leader. "Engineer," Carlos came running up the stairs, carrying a tablet with urgent news. "We just got a call from the Japanese investors." "What kind of call?" "They want to hire you to review all their structural projects under construction in Brazil. They offered $2 million for a 6-month consultancy." Marina looked at the city stretching below her, thousands of buildings, each potentially carrying similar errors that could cause future tragedies. "Carlos, how many projects do they have underway?" 17 residential complexes. Approximately 20,000 housing units. 20,000 families, Marina murmured. "If there are similar errors in other projects." "Exactly. You could save tens of thousands of lives." Marina leaned on the safety rail, feeling the weight of responsibility. 7 years carrying bricks and sweeping streets, and now she had the opportunity to prevent tragedies on a scale she hadn't dared imagine. "But there's a problem," Carlos continued. "To accept contracts of that magnitude, you need to revalidate your engineering license. And to revalidate, you need to face the engineering board that revoked your credentials after Mexico City." Marina closed her eyes, remembering the public humiliation, the journalists who portrayed her as incompetent, the families who blamed her for deaths she had tried to prevent. "Carlos, I don't know if I have the strength to go through that again." "Marina," Anna approached, "can I tell you something?" "Of course." "Before you arrived, I was just a welder following orders. I thought I'd never be more than that." Anna paused. "You taught me that competence doesn't need permission to manifest." "And what does that have to do with it?" "It has to do with the fact that you don't need a license to be a genius. You need a license to save lives officially." Marcos, who had climbed up behind Carlos, joined the conversation. "Marina, can I talk about something I noticed?" "What?" "In the last 2 months, 15 engineers have visited our site. They all wanted to understand how you identified the error they missed. And they all left here with more respect for you than for any other professional they know." Marina looked at her small team, Carlos who had become a dedicated pupil, Anna who had discovered leadership, Marcos who had learned to question authorities when necessary. "If I face the board, if I try to revalidate." "We'll go with you," Carlos said immediately. "As witnesses to your competence." "Me too," Anna confirmed. "You taught me that defending what's right is a moral responsibility. And I know journalists who can cover the hearing fairly," Marcos added. Marina smiled, feeling for the first time in 7 years that she wasn't alone. All right, let's try. But first, I need to finish this project. How much time is left? Marina looked at the towers rising majestic and secure. 3 months for full completion. 6 months for final resistance tests. And after we'll show the world that an engineer who carried bricks for food can teach the entire industry what really matters in construction. At that moment, Anna pointed to the site gate. Guys, look who's arriving. A news van parked at the entrance, followed by another, then 2 more. The press, Carlos said nervously. Someone leaked about Marina. Marina watched the reporters getting out of the vans with cameras and microphones. 7 years ago, cameras had documented her public humiliation. Now, they'd have a chance to document her redemption. Marina, Marcos asked, "Are you ready to face the cameras?" Marina looked at the towers she had saved, at the team she had elevated, at the 1,500 families who would live safely thanks to her work. Marcos, 7 years ago cameras destroyed me for trying to do the right thing. Today, they'll document that doing the right thing always wins in the end. Even if it takes 7 years to win, especially when it takes 7 years. Because victories that cost everything taste sweeter. The reporters crowded around the construction site gate like vultures sensing opportunity. Marina watched from the tower as Carlos went down to try to control the situation, but she knew it was useless. When the media smelled scandal, there was no hiding. "Engineer Mendoza," shouted a Globo reporter, pushing a microphone toward Carlos. "Is it true that Marina Valdez, the engineer responsible for the Mexico City tragedy, is working on your project?" Carlos looked up, where Marina watched the scene unfolding. She signaled for him to tell the truth. "Marina Valdez is supervising critical structural corrections that could save 1,500 lives," Carlos replied firmly. "But engineer," another reporter interjected, "Marina Valdez is considered responsible for 300 deaths in Mexico. How can you trust such important work to her?" "Because she's the only person who identified a problem that 3 certified engineers missed," Carlos retorted. "And because she's risking humiliation again to prevent tragedy from repeating." Marina slowly descended from the tower, knowing the moment had come to face the demons she had fled for 7 years. "I'm Marina Valdez," she announced, approaching the reporters. "And yes, I'm here." "Dr. Valdez," the Globo reporter stepped forward, "how do you respond to accusations that your errors caused one of the greatest structural tragedies in Latin America?" Marina looked directly at the camera. "I respond that it wasn't my errors that caused the tragedy. It was the investors' refusal to pay for corrections I identified 2 months before the earthquake." "But the official reports..." "The official reports lied to protect powerful people," Marina interrupted. "And today I have proof of that." Marina pulled an envelope from her pocket, documents she had kept for 7 years waiting for the right moment to reveal the truth. "These are emails from Alessandro Rossi, Robert Chen, and other investors in the Mexico project, confirming they received my reports about structural problems and chose to ignore them." Alessandro Rossi, who was watching from the container, visibly paled. "Dr. Valdez," another reporter asked, "why didn't you reveal these documents before?" "Because I was broke, without legal resources, pursued by billion-dollar companies' lawyers. Who would believe an incompetent engineer against the word of respected magnates? And now?" Marina pointed to the towers behind her. "Now I have proof of competence that no one can deny. And I have investors who preferred to spend $8 million to save lives rather than sue me for telling the truth." Hiroshi approached the group of journalists. "I can confirm that Marina identified a critical error that our best engineers missed. And I can confirm that the error was identical to the one that caused the tragedy in Mexico." "Mr. Tanaka," the reporter turned to him, "are you publicly defending Marina Valdez?" "I'm defending technical competence and moral integrity. Marina risked rejection again to save the lives of people she doesn't even know." But what about her past? Her past shows she always prioritized safety over profit. Exactly the kind of professional we want in our projects. Marina looked at the cameras, knowing her next words would be heard by millions of people. 7 years ago, I tried to do the right thing and was destroyed for it. I spent years believing I had been punished for incompetence. She paused. Today I understand I was punished for having too much competence in a world that prefers silent professionals to ethical ones. What changed? Nothing changed. I still prioritize lives over profits. I still question dangerous projects. I still refuse to stay quiet when I see people at risk. Marina looked at Anna, who watched from the tower with visible pride. The difference is that now I have a team that understands that ethical engineering isn't paranoia, it's responsibility. Dr. Valdez, a reporter asked, "What's your message for other engineers who may be facing similar pressures?" Marina smiled, thinking of the 7 years of forced silence that had ended. My message is, document everything, never retreat from the truth, and remember that preferring to be an honest unemployed person over a complicit employee is a choice that saves lives. Even if it costs your career? Especially if it costs your career. Because careers can be rebuilt. Lives lost in negligence cannot. At that moment, Alessandro Rossi emerged from the container and approached the group. "Marina," he said publicly, "I want to apologize. For Mexico City, for not heeding your warnings, for participating in your professional destruction. Alessandro. And I want to announce that Rossi Construction will implement a mandatory protocol. Any engineer who identifies structural risks will have full legal protection and compensation for necessary corrections." Robert Chin joined him. Chin Industries adopts the same protocol. Never again will a professional be punished for prioritizing safety. Marina felt tears forming, but they were tears of victory, not pain. "Thank you. But this isn't about me. It's about ensuring no other engineer goes through what I went through." "How do we do that?" Marina looked at the towers she had saved, at the team she had created, at the cameras documenting a historic moment. By creating an institute that teaches engineers not just calculation and design, but the moral courage to question authorities when lives are at risk. Institute? The Marina Valdez Institute for Ethical Engineering, where professionals learn that competence without conscience is dangerous, but competence with courage can literally move mountains. 6 months after the media exposure that restored her reputation, Marina stood at the construction site that had become much more than a building project. It had become a symbol that technical integrity could defeat corporate corruption. But what neither the investors nor the media knew was that Marina carried an even heavier secret about the Mexico City tragedy. "Marina," said Dr. Patricia Morales, the investigative journalist who had become Marina's ally in exposing the truth, "documents have arrived that you need to see." "What documents?" Patricia opened a laptop showing emails leaked by an anonymous Chin Industries employee. Internal emails from 7 years ago. "Marina, they didn't just ignore your warnings about the Mexico building." Marina approached the screen, reading with growing horror. "They actively sabotaged your attempts to fix the problem." "What do you mean?" "Look at this email from Robert Chin to the engineering team. Ignore all reports from Marina Valdez. If she continues insisting on expensive modifications, invent technical reasons to discredit her analyses." Marina felt as if she'd been punched in the stomach. They deliberately sabotaged. And there's worse. "Look at this one from Alessandro Rossi. Marina is getting too close to the truth. We need to officially transfer project responsibility to her. If anything goes wrong, she'll be blamed, not us." "My God," Marina whispered. "They set me up from the beginning." "Marina, there's more. Much more." Patricia showed a final document that made Marina sit down abruptly. They knew about specific seismic risk in Mexico City. They had geological reports showing a magnitude 7.1 earthquake was likely within 5 years. And still they built a structure they knew was inadequate to withstand a tremor of that intensity. Marina looked at the document dated 2 years before the tragedy. Patricia, this means... It means the 342 deaths weren't an accident. They were premeditated negligent homicide. Marina remained silent for several minutes, processing the revelation that completely changed her understanding of the events. Patricia, I need to do something with this information. What? I need to return to Mexico. I need to show this evidence to the victims' families. Marina, this will reopen a massive legal case. Good. Because 300 families deserve to know the truth about why they lost their loved ones. Carlos, who had been listening, approached. Marina, if you return to Mexico, it could be dangerous. These men have a lot of power and a lot to lose. Carlos, for 7 years I carried guilt for deaths I didn't cause. Now that I know the complete truth, I can't live knowing murderers are free. And the projects here? The institute we planned? Marina looked at the Twin Towers, the structure she had saved, a symbol that ethical engineering could prevail. The institute will continue, but it will have an additional mission, investigating and exposing criminal structural projects worldwide. How? By creating an international network of ethical engineers. Professionals willing to question authorities and document irregularities. Anna, who had been working nearby, approached upon hearing the conversation. Engineer Marina, may I ask a question? Of course, Anna. If you return to Mexico and achieve justice for those families, what will that change for us here? Marina looked at Anna, the welder who had become a supervisor, a symbol that competence could be elevated when the right people offered opportunities. Anna, it will change everything. Because when ethical engineers win against corrupt corporations, it sets a precedent for other professionals to have the courage to report irregularities. And if it goes wrong? If they try to destroy you again? Marina smiled, looking at the team that had become her chosen family. Anna, 7 years ago I was alone facing billionaire businessmen. Now I have you. I have irrefutable evidence, and I have something I didn't have before. What? I have absolute certainty that I'm on the right side of history. That afternoon, Marina made a decision that would change not only her life, but the future of ethical engineering worldwide. She would buy a ticket to Mexico City and face the ghosts that had haunted her for 7 years. But first, she would finish the Twin Towers. Because 1,500 families deserve to live in total safety, and she wouldn't leave any detail without personal supervision. The engineer who had asked to carry bricks for food was about to carry something much heavier, the weight of bringing justice to 300 families who had waited for the truth for 7 years. 3 weeks before traveling to Mexico, Marina received a call that completely changed her strategy for seeking justice. Dr. Valdez? This is attorney Carmen Rodriguez, from Rodriguez and Associates in Mexico City. I represent the families of the 2017 collapse victims. Marina felt her heart race. The families reached out to me? Not exactly. We reached out to you. Dr. Valdez, we received leaked documents that prove your innocence and the investor's guilt. How did you get them? A Chin Industries employee with a crisis of conscience delivered complete files. Emails, internal reports, recordings of meetings where they discussed how to transfer blame to you. Marina leaned on the desk, feeling a mixture of relief and anger. Do you have enough evidence? Enough to criminally prosecute Robert Chin, Alessandro Rossi, and 12 other executives for aggravated negligent homicide. And why are you calling me? Because we need your testimony. You're the only person who can technically explain how they knew the structure was dangerous and chose to build anyway. Marina looked out the construction site window, seeing Anna coordinating the welding team with the competence that had blossomed under her guidance. Attorney Rodriguez, testifying means publicly exposing everything that happened. It means 300 families will finally know they lost loved ones to greed, not technical error. When would the trial be? In 2 months. International media will cover it. It will be one of the most important corporate liability cases of the decade. Marina closed her eyes, imagining facing Robert Chen and Alessandro Rossi, men who had destroyed her life, in an open courtroom. I'll testify. Dr. Valdez, I need to warn you. They'll try to destroy your credibility again. They'll hire the best lawyers, private investigators, defamation experts. And what will I have? You'll have the truth. And you'll have irrefutable evidence of your technical competence, like these twin towers you saved. After hanging up, Marina found Carlos, Ana, and Marcos waiting with worried expressions. You heard the call? She asked. We heard, Carlos confirmed. Marina, are you sure you want to do this? I'm sure I need to do this. Why? Marina looked at her team, people who had learned to trust her, who followed her technical leadership without question. Because if I don't testify, 300 families will never get justice. And other engineers will continue to be silenced when they try to protect lives. Ana approached. Engineer Marina, may I make a suggestion? Of course, Ana. What if we go with you? As moral support? Ana, you can't get involved. We can and we want to, Marcos interrupted. Marina, you taught us that defending what's right is a moral obligation. And you taught us, Carlos added, that competence without courage is useless. Marina smiled, feeling warmth spreading through her chest. You would really do that? Travel to another country to support me at a trial? We will, Ana said firmly. Because you did more than teach us engineering. You taught us that doing the right thing is worth any sacrifice. 2 weeks later, Marina was at the airport with a ticket to Mexico City in her hand and her heart beating like a war drum. Beside her, Carlos, Ana, Marcos, and Patricia awaited the same flight. Nervous? Patricia asked. Terrified, Marina admitted. But also, relieved. 7 years carrying the truth alone, and finally I'll be able to share that weight. Marina, Carlos said, regardless of what happens at the trial, I want you to know something. What? You've already won. Because you taught us that a true engineer isn't someone who never makes mistakes, it's someone who has the courage to correct them. Ana approached with something in her hands. Engineer Marina, I brought a gift. It was an aluminum lunchbox identical to the one Ana had lent her on the first day. What for? To remember that everything started when I shared food with a stranger. And ended with that stranger changing our lives forever. Marina hugged Ana, tears flowing freely. Ana, you taught me something more important than engineering. What? You taught me that simple kindness can be the most solid foundation for building anything. When they called the flight to Mexico City, Marina looked one last time at the Twin Towers shining in the distance, a safe structure that would shelter 1,500 families thanks to her refusal to stay quiet. Let's make justice, she told her team. Let's make history, Carlos corrected. And together, they boarded the flight toward the confrontation that would determine whether 7 years of suffering would transform into a victory that would protect generations of future ethical engineers. The Mexico City courtroom was packed beyond capacity when Marina took the witness stand. 500 people crammed into the auditorium, victims' families, international journalists, engineers from dozens of countries, and architecture students who had traveled to witness what many consider the most important trial in the history of ethical engineering. Marina looked at the defendant's bench where Robert Chen, Alessandro Rossi, and 10 other executives sat with expressions ranging from arrogance to poorly disguised nervousness. Across the courtroom, 300 families watched her with expectations she carried like a physical weight in her chest. Dr. Marina Valdez, began Federal Prosecutor Angela Santos. Can you explain to the court your relationship with the residential project that collapsed in September 2017? Marina took a deep breath, glancing quickly at Carlos, Ana, and Marcos, who sat in the front row as moral support. I was hired as chief structural engineer for the Torres del Sol project. My responsibility was ensuring the building would withstand typical seismic activity for the region. And during your work, did you identify problems? I identified a critical error in the seismic resistance calculations. The building was being constructed with structure inadequate to withstand earthquakes above magnitude 6.5. What did you do when you discovered this error? I documented everything and presented a complete report to the investors, explaining that an earthquake of magnitude 7.0 or higher would cause structural collapse. Marina pointed to documents projected on the courtroom screen. This is an email from March 15, 2017, sent to Robert Chen, Alessandro Rossi, and other investors, specifically warning that construction should be halted until structural corrections were implemented. Prosecutor Angela showed Robert Chen's response projected for the entire court to see. Marina is being unnecessarily alarmist. Modification costs are unacceptable. Continue construction according to original schedule. Dr. Valdez, what did you do after receiving this response? I tried to escalate to local authorities. I approached the Urban Safety Department, sent copies to the Engineering Association, even contacted the press. And what was the defendant's reaction? Marina looked directly at Robert Chen. They sued me for breach of confidentiality, spread that I was having a nervous breakdown, and officially removed me from the project. But you continued trying to warn about the risks. I continued. Because I knew that when, not if, but when, an earthquake reached critical magnitude, 300 families would die unnecessarily. Robert Chen's defense attorney stood up. Objection. The witness is speculating about future events. I wasn't speculating, Marina responded before the prosecutor could protest. I was making mathematical calculations based on geological data. Earthquakes are predictable in terms of probability and structural impact. Dr. Valdez, Prosecutor Angela continued, can you explain to the court exactly how you knew a specific earthquake would cause collapse? Marina stood and walked to the whiteboard that had been installed especially for her demonstration. Mexico City is built on a dry lake bed that amplifies seismic waves. Buildings constructed with inadequate foundations experience resonance that multiplies earthquake force by a factor of 3 to 5. Marina began drawing diagrams that made engineers in the audience whisper in admiration. Torres del Sol was built with a shallow foundation of only 12 meters. For a 20-story building in a seismic zone, a foundation of at least 25 meters would be necessary. And the defendants knew this? Not only did they know, but they received my specific calculations showing that a magnitude 7.1 earthquake would cause total collapse in 43 seconds. Marina wrote on the board, Mag 7.1 equals collapse in 43 seconds equals 342 preventable deaths. 43 seconds, asked the judge, clearly impacted by the precision. 43 seconds. The time 300 families had to say goodbye to life because investors preferred to save $15 million in structural corrections. Marina turned to the defendants. Robert, Alessandro, do you remember this number? 43 seconds? Robert Chen stood up, red with anger. Objection. The witness is intimidating. I'm not intimidating, Marina interrupted. I'm educating. Because apparently you didn't understand the first time I explained that your decisions kill people. The courtroom erupted in murmurs, and the judge banged the gavel demanding order. Dr. Valdez, Prosecutor Angela continued, after the tragedy, the defendants publicly blamed you. How did this affect your life? Marina returned to the witness stand, looking at the families watching her with total attention. I lost everything. Professional license, home, family, Identity. I spent 7 years doing manual labor, carrying bricks, sweeping streets, because no one would hire an engineer responsible for 300 deaths. But you didn't give up? I couldn't give up. Because I knew that if I stayed quiet, other buildings would be constructed with the same errors, other families would lose loved ones. Marina pointed to a special section of the courtroom where 20 engineers from different countries were seated. These professionals traveled from their countries to witness this trial. Because they all faced similar pressures, threats, lawsuits, career destruction, when they tried to prioritize safety over profit. And your message for them? Marina stood up, looking directly at the cameras broadcasting the trial live to the entire world. My message is that 7 years carrying bricks taught me that integrity is worth any sacrifice. And that when we do the right thing, the universe conspires to give us the necessary tools to win. Even if it takes 7 years? Especially if it takes 7 years. Because victories that cost everything teach lessons that are never forgotten. The verdict arrived after 3 days of deliberation that kept the engineering world in total suspense. Marina sat between Carlos and Ana when the judge returned to the courtroom carrying the document that would determine not just the defendant's fate, but the future of the entire construction industry. In the case of the state of Mexico versus Robert Chin and others, the judge began, his voice echoing through the packed courtroom. This court finds the defendants guilty of aggravated negligent homicide, criminal negligence, and conspiracy to conceal evidence. The courtroom erupted. Victims' families cried with relief, journalists typed frantically, and the defendants sat as if electrocuted. Robert Chin, sentenced to 15 years in prison and $100 million in compensation to victims' families. Alessandro Rossi, sentenced to 12 years in prison and $80 million. Marina closed her eyes, 7 years of pain finally beginning to transform into relief. Additionally, the judge continued, this court orders the creation of a $300 million fund to compensate all affected families, to be administered by Dr. Marina Valdez. Marina opened her eyes in shock. Your Honor, Dr. Valdez, this court recognizes that you tried to prevent this tragedy and were systematically persecuted for doing your job correctly. Administering this fund ensures families receive support from someone who genuinely cares about their well-being. Ana held Marina's hand. Engineer, you did it. We did it, Marina corrected, looking at her team who had traveled thousands of miles to support her. After the trial, Marina was surrounded by victims' families wanting to thank her personally. Dr. Marina, said Elena Vasquez, a mother who had lost her 8-year-old son in the collapse, thank you for never giving up. For carrying our pain when we didn't even know you existed. Elena, I'm so sorry for your son's loss. His name was Miguel. He wanted to be an engineer when he grew up. Elena paused, wiping tears. Now I know that if he had grown up, he would have wanted to be like you. Marina felt her heart breaking and healing simultaneously. Elena, may I do something in Miguel's memory? What? The institute I'm creating. May I name it the Miguel Vasquez Institute for Ethical Engineering? Elena broke down crying, hugging Marina with strength that nearly knocked her over. Yes. Yes. My son will be remembered forever. One by one, other families approached, sharing names and dreams of lost loved ones. Marina wrote down each name, each story, promising they would be honored in the institute that would transform tragedy into protection for future generations. Dr. Valdez approached a man of about 60 whom Marina recognized from trial photos. I'm Carlos Mendoza. The father of the girl Sofia? Marina asked softly. Yes. Sofia was 6. She wanted to be an artist. Carlos, Sofia's father, took a deep breath. I want you to know I don't blame you. I never blamed you. I always knew someone had tried to warn about the problems. How did you know? because Sophia was at the engineering school working on an earthquake project 3 days before the tragedy. Her teacher had mentioned that the responsible engineer had warned about seismic risks but was ignored. Marina felt tears streaming. Your daughter was studying earthquakes? She was. And you know what else? The teacher said Sophia asked, why didn't they listen to the engineer if she was right? Marina could barely speak. She asked that? She did. And the teacher answered, because sometimes adults choose money instead of doing the right thing. Carlos, Sophia's father, took Marina's hands in his. Dr. Marina, my 6-year-old daughter understood something powerful men refuse to understand. That listening to competent people is more important than protecting profits. Carlos. That's why I want the Institute to bear her name too. The Miguel Sofia Institute for Ethical Engineering. So other children learn that doing the right thing is worth any price. Marina looked around the courtroom, at families who finally had justice, at her team who had crossed continents to support her, at journalists documenting this historic moment. Carlos, Miguel, Sofia, and all the victims didn't die in vain if we can ensure no other building is constructed with conscious negligence. And will we succeed? Marina looked at the cameras broadcasting live to engineers worldwide. We will succeed. Because today it wasn't just Robert Chen and Alessandro who were condemned. It was the entire mentality that profit is worth more than life. 2 years after the historic trial, Marina stood in the main auditorium of the Miguel Sofia Institute for Ethical Engineering, watching the graduation of the 5th class of engineers specialized in detecting and preventing structural negligence. Today, Marina told the 100 graduates from 40 countries, you're not just receiving diplomas. You're receiving the responsibility to protect lives you may never know. In the front row, Anna, now the Institute's technical director, watched with pride that had grown since the days she lent lunchboxes to hungry strangers. Professor Marina, a student from Japan, raised his hand. May I ask about the Mexico case? Of course, Hiroshi. How did you maintain the courage to report the problems even knowing you'd be destroyed? Marina looked at the giant photograph on the wall, an image of the 342 victims, including Miguel and Sofia, that had become a permanent memorial. Hiroshi, it wasn't courage. It was the impossibility of living knowing people would die if I stayed silent. But you lost everything. I lost material things. But I would have lost something much more important if I'd remained quiet. What? I would have lost the ability to look at myself in the mirror. And I discovered that integrity is worth more than any career or comfort. A student from Germany raised his hand. Professor, how do we know when it's worth risking our careers for an ethical issue? Excellent question, Klaus. The answer is, it's always worth it when lives are at risk. Always. Even if no one believes us? Marina smiled, remembering the days carrying bricks while carrying a truth nobody wanted to hear. Especially when nobody believes. Because truth doesn't need approval to be true. After the ceremony, Marina received a call that would change her trajectory once again. Dr. Valdez? This is the UN Secretary General. We'd like to offer you the position of Global Director of Structural Safety. Marina nearly dropped the phone. Global Director? Your work at the Institute has created a revolution in global engineering. 15 countries have already implemented mandatory Valdez safety protocols. Valdez protocols? The procedures you develop to identify and correct structural negligence before it causes tragedies. Marina looked out the Institute window, seeing Anna coordinating construction of a new seismic testing laboratory. And what would my responsibility be? Overseeing structural safety for all construction projects funded by international organizations. Hospitals, schools, social housing, projects affecting millions of people. Millions? Dr. Valdez, We estimate worldwide implementation of Valdez protocols could prevent up to 100,000 deaths from structural negligence over the next 10 years. Marina sat down slowly. 100,000 lives, a number that made the 342 Mexican deaths seem like just the beginning of a much larger mission. I accept the position, she said without hesitation. Excellent. But Dr. Valdez, there's a complication. What complication? Some countries are resisting the protocols because local construction companies don't want additional safety costs. Which countries? Brazil, China, India, Russia, markets where construction companies have significant political influence. Marina smiled, thinking of all the years she'd spent being intimidated by powerful businessmen. And you think I'll be intimidated by political pressure? No, Dr. Valdez. We think you'll do exactly what you've always done, prioritize lives over political convenience. Correct. When can I start? Immediately. But first, you should know you'll face opposition from businessmen who consider Valdez protocols unnecessary obstacles to development. Marina laughed, remembering the days asking for work in exchange for food. I've already faced the worst businessmen can do. Now it's my turn to show what a truly ethical engineer can do when she has international resources and support. Dr. Valdez? Yes? We're going to change the construction world forever. Marina looked at the institute she had created, at the students spreading across the world carrying the message of ethical engineering, at Anna who had transformed from laborer to technical director. We're not going to change the construction world, she corrected. We're going to save the construction world. One safe structure at a time. 10 years after that day she asked to carry bricks in exchange for food, Marina stood atop the first skyscraper built entirely with Valdez protocols, a 50-story tower in Tokyo that had perfectly withstood a magnitude 8.2 earthquake just 1 week earlier. Dr. Valdez, said Kenji Nakamura, the chief engineer who had supervised the construction, thanks to your protocols, this building didn't have a single crack during the earthquake. 1,200 people remained safe in their homes while older buildings around suffered significant damage. Marina looked at Tokyo stretching infinitely below, dotted with hundreds of constructions that now followed safety standards she had developed after years of suffering. Kenji, it wasn't my protocols that saved these people. It was humanity's refusal to accept that structural tragedies are inevitable. How so? When 300 people died in Mexico City, the entire world could have said accidents happen. Instead, they decided it would never happen again. Marina pointed to statistics projected on the observatory wall. Deaths from structural negligence, 2017 equals 3,847 globally. 2027 equals 0. 0 deaths in an entire year? 0 preventable deaths from negligence. Natural accidents still happen, but no person died because a company chose to save on safety. Anna, now international director of Valdez protocol implementation, joined them in the observatory. Marina, final confirmations have arrived. The last resistant country just approved mandatory implementation. Which country? North Korea. Apparently, not even dictatorships want to be responsible for preventable structural tragedies. Marina laughed. That means every construction on the planet now follows protocols you developed. 0 exceptions. Marina leaned on the observatory railing, trying to process the magnitude of an achievement that had begun with a humble request for manual labor. Anna, sometimes I still can't believe this is real. Why? Because when I was carrying bricks for food, my biggest dream was getting temporary work as an engineering assistant. I never imagined I'd be overseeing the structural safety of the entire planet. Carlos approached carrying a tablet with breaking news. Marina, a study on the impact of Valdez protocols was just published. What study? the Global Statistics Institute calculated how many lives were saved over the past 10 years. Marina looked at the numbers on the screen and felt her legs go weak. 230,000 lives saved. Tragedies prevented in 140 countries. 230,000, Anna repeated in awe. Marina, you saved an entire city's population. We saved, Marina corrected. Every engineer who had the courage to implement protocols despite pressure. Every government that chose safety over economy. Every businessman who decided to do the right thing. At that moment, Marina's phone rang. It was an international call. Dr. Valdez? This is the Nobel Committee. We want to inform you that you've been selected for the Nobel Peace Prize for contributions to global safety through ethical engineering. Marina nearly dropped the phone. Nobel Prize? Your refusal to accept that structural tragedies are inevitable has saved more lives than any military or diplomatic intervention in the past 50 years. Anna, Carlos, and Kenji watched Marina process the news that crowned a decade of struggle. When is the ceremony? Marina asked. In 2 months, in Oslo. But Dr. Valdez, there's a tradition of winners giving a lecture to the entire world. What message would you like to convey? Marina looked at Anna, the welder who became an international director, at Carlos, the engineer who learned to question authorities, at the institute that trained hundreds of ethical professionals annually. I want to convey that the most important story isn't about an engineer who won a Nobel Prize. It's about a welder who shared her lunchbox with a hungry stranger. How so? Ana Pereira taught me that simple kindness can be the most solid foundation for building anything, including a world where nobody dies from preventable negligence. After hanging up, Marina hugged Ana with infinite gratitude. Ana, without you none of this would have happened. Marina, I just lent some food. You lent hope when I had lost everything. And hope was the missing ingredient to transform technical knowledge into a force for change. That evening, Marina dined with her team atop the world's safest tower, watching the city glitter with lights from millions of people living in structures they knew were absolutely safe. Anna, Marina said during dessert, do you remember when I asked if I could carry bricks for food? I remember. You seemed so lost. I was lost. But I wasn't broken. I just needed someone who believed that competence with conscience is worth more than competence with convenience. And now? Marina looked at the stars appearing in the night sky, thinking of the 230,000 people who were alive because someone refused to accept that tragedies are inevitable. Now I know that the woman who asked to carry bricks for food always had the strength to carry the weight of changing the entire world. She just needed to discover she didn't have to carry it alone. Anna smiled. And what's the next mission? The next mission is ensuring no engineer in the world goes through what I went through. That doing the right thing is always the safest option, not the most dangerous one. The engineer who had asked for manual labor in exchange for nourishment had become the guardian of global structural safety, proving that when competence meets moral courage, there is no limit to how many lives can be protected. And somewhere in the universe, 342 souls rested in peace, knowing their deaths had not been forgotten, but transformed into a protective shield for all future generations.